I'm 83 years old and I've discovered the secret to healthy aging, but it's not what you think. It's not about what you add to your life, it's about what you finally have the courage to take away. For most of my 58-year marriage, I was exhausted, not from the work, but from the silence. The silent work of hiding my husband Harold's drinking for years, of smoothing things over for the children, of carrying grief after loss like a second skeleton inside me. The world saw a presentable family. I felt a deep, lonely fatigue. I was spending my life force on burial duties. I was preserving a facade for my adult children and everyone else, and it left me with nothing. Let me tell you what really happened. You see, the crisis wasn't a heart attack or a fall. It was a slow collapse. By the time I was 80, 3 years after losing my spouse, I was a ghost in this house. I'd sit in this chair and just not move. I had no energy. I blamed my body, but it was my heart. It was full of secrets I was never meant to carry. The biggest one was about my son, Robbie. He died in a car accident in 1989. He was 19, and he was driving my car that night. I never told a soul I blamed myself. I carried that as my private sin. I thought a mother's strength was in quiet endurance. That's what my own mother told me. After Robbie died, she said my grief was unseemly. Can you imagine? I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I swallowed that fury, and I added it to the weight. There were other secrets too, things from my marriage. Harold and I separated for 8 months in 1978. Nobody in the family talks about it. I moved in with my sister Carolyn, and during that time, there was another man. A teacher from the school where I worked. His name was Arthur. We never did anything wrong, but one afternoon on Carolyn's porch, his hand covered mine on the table. Just for a second. There was this silent understanding. It was a door to a different life, and I closed it. I pulled my hand away. I chose the known path. I went back to Harold. I never told him. I never told anyone. I locked that what if away and spent decades wondering about the road not taken, feeding a quiet regret that drained me. And then there was Harold's family. He had a falling out with his brother Carl back in the 90s. Harold was stubborn. He cut Carl off completely. But I knew Carl's wife was sick. They were struggling. So for 15 years, I secretly sent them money. Every month. I'd write a cheque and mail it to a post office box. Harold never knew. I was betraying my husband to do what I thought was right. The guilt of that secret was a constant hum in the background of my mind. I was so afraid he'd find out. I was protecting his pride and my own idea of myself as a good person, and it was exhausting. The weight of all of it, Robbie, the separation, Arthur, the money, it just piled up. By 2018, when Harold was in the hospital at the end, I was holding his hand. He wasn't responsive, and I just started talking. I told him about sending the money to Carl. I said, "I've been doing it for 15 years, Harold, and I'm not sorry." And I swear I felt the faintest pressure from his fingers, just a squeeze. Or maybe I imagined it, but I told him. I waited 58 years to say some things, and I almost waited too long. He died that night, and I was left with all the things I still hadn't said. That's when my daughter Patty set up this camera. She said, "Just talk, Mama, talk to the air." I thought it was foolish, but I was so tired and so lonely in my marriage to his memory. So I started. And the first few times I talked about easy things, my mother, the textile factory. Then one day I mentioned Robbie's name. I described the sound of the police knock at the door. My voice broke. I stopped the video. Patty said to post it anyway. I did. And the comments, thousands of them. Other parents who'd lost children. People writing, "I understand. It wasn't your fault. Thank you for saying it." It felt like a kind of absolution, a shared story instead of a private sin. Speaking it out loud didn't bring him back, but it set the shame down. So I kept going. I talked about the separation in 78. I didn't name Arthur, but I talked about the porch and the hand and the choice. I talked about the miscarriage I had in 1971 that I never grieved, because back then you just didn't. And a strange thing happened. After each video, after each confession, I felt lighter. The fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep started to lift. I wasn't adding green juice or fancy pills. I was subtracting. I was taking the heavy, silent things out of the dark rooms in my heart and holding them up to the light. The energy I'd been using to hold those doors shut, it became mine again. Last week, my great-granddaughter Lily was here. She's 3. She was chasing a butterfly in the backyard. I was watching her from the porch, and for the first time, I didn't feel that sharp, awful pang of sorrow for all the things Robbie never saw. I just felt a clean, sharp joy that I was here to see it, that I had the energy to get up and follow her, to laugh, to be present. That joy was a direct result of having set the old sorrow down. I had created space for it. So that's my secret. My mental health over 60, my energy at 83, it came from the terrifying, liberating act of telling the truth. You stop spending all your strength on concealment. You turn private shame into a connection. You reclaim the life force you've been wasting on burial duties. It's not about adding years to your life. It's about adding life to your years by finally letting the quiet parts be heard. Stay with me. There's more I need to say. I'm sitting here in my burgundy chair, the one you always see. My daughter Patty says people want to know my secret for energy at 83. Well, it's not a secret. It's an excavation. For most of my life, energy was a currency I spent on silence. You have to understand that. My marriage to Harold started in 1962. Energy back then was the work of appearing normal. It was smiling at church socials while my stomach was in knots, wondering if he'd been at the bar. It was stitching perfect hems on dresses for women who had lives that seemed seamless, while mine felt held together with basting thread, temporary and liable to come apart any minute. That work became my pattern. I didn't see it as a drain until a specific afternoon, years later. It was 1990, a year after Robbie. I was in his room, which we'd kept just so. I found an old pair of his jeans in my closet. I sat on his bed with my sewing kit and I re-hemmed them. My hands were steady, but I was whispering, "I'm so sorry I let you take the car. I'm so sorry." The energy it took to hold that blame inside me, to polish it in private, it was more exhausting than any factory shift. That private sorrow was a family secret, and my mother, Ruth, had rules. She came over that same year. She saw my red eyes and she said, "Dorothy, this grief is unseemly. A woman's strength is in quiet endurance." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shatter her china. Instead, I bit my tongue. I bit down until I tasted that copper tang of blood. I swallowed that too. I added her disapproval to the load. That philosophy of silent endurance shaped everything. Even a moment years before that could have changed my path. 1978. I was living with my sister Carolyn during the separation. A man named Arthur, a teacher from the school, came by. We sat on her porch. He was kind. He listened. His hand covered mine on the wicker table, just for a second. In that silence was a whole other future. I pulled my hand back. I chose the known path, the heavy one, back to Harold. I locked that what if away in a tiny box and buried it deep. I went back. And eventually Harold got sober in 83. The second marriage was better, but the habit of secrecy was already bone deep. When Harold cut off his brother Carl, I knew Carl's wife was sick. So for 15 years I secretly sent them money orders, every month. The energy wasn't in the sending, it was in the hiding. The remembering to get the mail before Harold, the little lies. It was another full-time job, this one in the shadows of my own home. I carried all these weights, Robbie, Mother, Arthur, Carl, thinking I was being strong. By 80, I was just empty. After Harold died in 2018, the silence got louder. Patty would visit and I'd see the worry in her eyes. I had no energy for joy. I was a ghost in my own living room. I'd sit and feel the sheer tonnage of all I'd never said. It wasn't a sleepiness, it was a gravity pulling me down into this very chair for good. Then Patty, bless her, brought in a camera. She said, "Just talk, Mama, tell a story." She had no idea what she was unlocking. The first real confession wasn't planned. I was talking about 1971 and it just came out. The miscarriage between Jimmy and Patty. I'd never even told my sister. I spoke it to that little red recording light. The sky didn't fall. I posted it. And then strangers, thousands of them, wrote, "I understand." That "I understand" was like a key turning in a rusted lock. It didn't erase the pain, but it took it out of my solitary confinement. One unlocked door makes you look at the next, the biggest one, the one with Robbie's name on it. I decided to say his name. Robbie. I described the sound of the police knock at 2 a.m. My voice broke. I stopped the video, thinking I couldn't go on. But I pressed record again. I didn't tell them about the car, my secret blame. Not that day, just his name and the hole he left. The response. My God. Messages from other parents who'd lost children. They shared their stories. They offered a kind of absolution I'd never granted myself. The weight of that solitary grief, I realised, was never mine alone to carry. I began, slowly, to set it down. That act of speaking changed the physics of my heart. It created space. And in that space, all the other locked doors began to rattle. I couldn't stop. I talked about my mother, about the taste of blood in my mouth. I talked about Arthur on the porch. I even talked about the money orders to Carl. And with each confession, I felt lighter, but also more terrified. What if I'd been wrong? What if all that carrying was the only thing holding me together? The breaking point came last fall. Patty brought Lily over. My great-granddaughter was playing on the rug, and she looked up at me with those big eyes and said, "Gigi, tell me a happy story." And I froze. I looked at her, this perfect, joyful child, and all I could think of was Robbie at that age. All I could feel was the old, familiar wall of grief. But this time it was different. This time I didn't just feel sad, I felt angry. I was so angry that this shadow still fell between me and the sunlight of that little girl's face. I'd spoken Robbie's name to thousands, but I'd never said the core of it out loud, not to anyone. I sent Patty and Lily home. I sat in this chair in the quiet and I said it to the empty room. I was wrong. My voice sounded strange. I was wrong about everything. I thought carrying the blame for his death was my duty. I thought if I hurt enough, it meant I loved him enough. But all it did was make me a ghost. It cost me years of my own life. It cost me moments with my living children. It almost cost me Lily's butterfly. I remembered a specific day, a month after the funeral. My sister Carolyn had come over. She'd found me in Robbie's room just staring. She'd put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Dot, this isn't your fault. You have to know that." And I'd shrugged her off. I'd said, "You don't understand. It was my car." I pushed her kindness away. That was the true cost. I had built a prison of my own guilt and then refused every hand that tried to pull me out. Sitting here that evening last fall, I finally understood the trade. I had exchanged a living mother for a dead son. I had chosen to stay in the dark with him instead of stepping into the light for the people who were still here. That was the permanent loss. All those years I could have been present. I was just keeping vigil. It broke me, that realization. I cried harder than I had in decades. Not pretty tears, ugly, heaving sobs for the wasted time. But when the crying stopped, there was just quiet. Not the heavy silence from before, an empty quiet, a space. And in that space was the first crack of understanding. It wasn't about forgetting Robbie. It was about finally, after 34 years, letting myself live without him. That act of speaking changed the physics of my heart. It created space. And in that space, all the other locked doors began to rattle. I couldn't stop. I talked about my mother, about the taste of blood in my mouth. I talked about Arthur on the porch. I even talked about the money orders to Carl. And with each confession, I felt lighter, but also more terrified. What if I'd been wrong? What if all that carrying was the only thing holding me together? The breaking point came last fall. Patty brought Lily over. My great-granddaughter was playing on the rug, and she looked up at me with those big eyes and said, "Gigi, tell me a happy story." And I froze. I looked at her, this perfect, joyful child, and all I could think of was Robbie at that age. All I could feel was the old, familiar wall of grief. But this time it was different. This time I didn't just feel sad, I felt angry. I was so angry that this shadow still fell between me and the sunlight of that little girl's face. I'd spoken Robbie's name to thousands, but I'd never said the core of it out loud. Not to anyone. I sent Patty and Lily home. I sat in this chair in the quiet, and I said it to the empty room. I was wrong. My voice sounded strange. I was wrong about everything. I thought carrying the blame for his death was my duty. I thought if I hurt enough, it meant I loved him enough. But all it did was make me a ghost. It cost me years of my own life. It cost me moments with my living children. It almost cost me Lily's butterfly. I remembered a specific day, a month after the funeral. My sister Carolyn had come over. She'd found me in Robbie's room just staring. She put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Dot, this isn't your fault. You have to know that." And I'd shrugged her off. I'd said, "You don't understand. It was my car." I pushed her kindness away. That was the true cost. I had built a prison of my own guilt and then refused every hand that tried to pull me out. Sitting here that evening last fall, I finally understood the trade. I had exchanged a living mother for a dead son. I had chosen to stay in the dark with him instead of stepping into the light for the people who were still here. That was the permanent loss. All those years I could have been present. I was just keeping vigil. It broke me, that realization. I cried harder than I had in decades. Not pretty tears, ugly, heaving sobs for the wasted time. But when the crying stopped, there was just quiet. Not the heavy silence from before, an empty quiet, a space. And in that space was the first crack of understanding. It wasn't about forgetting Robbie. It was about finally, after 34 years, letting myself live without him. Here's what I learned, plain and simple. Love doesn't require a life sentence of secret penance. It never did. What my children needed, what Harold needed in those good later years, was a mother and a wife who was actually in the room with them, not a curator for a museum of sorrows. I was so busy tending the ghost, I neglected the living. That's the mistake. Don't make my mistake. So my advice for anyone my age who feels that deep, tired gravity, it's not about green juice, it's about audit. Take a quiet hour, sit with yourself and ask, what am I still carrying for someone else? What secret am I keeping to protect a peace that's already long gone? Is it a grudge against a parent who's dead and buried? A regret for a path you didn't take? A private shame you think defines you? Name it. Then find a way to put it down. You don't have to start with a camera. Start with a piece of paper. Write it, then burn it. Or tell your sister on the phone. Tell your best friend over tea. The vehicle doesn't matter. The act of moving it from the inside of you to the outside does. It creates a draft, and that draft lets fresh air into rooms in your heart you thought were sealed forever. You still have time, maybe not decades, but you have now. And now is enough to stop the bleeding of your energy. It's enough to choose presence over penance. I'm 83. I can't run a marathon, but I can sit in my backyard and feel the sun on my face and laugh at a 3-year-old chasing a butterfly and feel that joy clean and sharp without the old shadow falling across it. That is a miracle. That is energy. It was always there. I was just using it all to hold the fort against ghosts. Now, if this old woman rambling in her chair has meant anything to you today, do me a favour. Hit that subscribe button down there. It's free and it lets you know when I've parked myself here for another talk. Ring the little bell too. I don't do schedules, I just talk when the spirit moves me, and that bell lets you know I've settled in. If the video resonated, give it a thumbs up. It's a quiet way of saying, I understand. And I've learned that's the most powerful phrase in the world. In the comments, I'd love to know, what's one small weight you could set down this week? Just name it. You don't have to tell the story. Just naming it is the first stitch in loosening the seam. And if you know someone who's been quiet and tired for a long time, share this with them. Just send it. No note needed. Sometimes a story is a key you can slip under a locked door. On my channel, there's a link in the description to a form where you can send me your stories if you want to. I read them all, every single one. It's a privilege. And if you're looking for something to read that gets at this same feeling, there's a book by a woman named Kate Bowler called No Cure for Being Human. She's younger than me, but she's wise about living in the messy middle. I keep it on the shelf right over there. That's all I've got for today. The light's getting low through this window and my sweet tea is just ice. Thank you for listening. It matters more than you know. This old chair feels lighter every time we talk. I'll just sit here a moment longer, watching the dust dance in the last of the sunbeam, feeling the quiet hum of a heart that's finally running on its own fuel.